How's it going, everybody? My name is Rob Wynn, and this video is going to be about aspect-based sentiment analysis, specifically how you can do it with the current, as of May 2024, state-of-the-art language learning model, InstructABSA. Now, most of this video is going to be about how to use the InstructABSA repo and how to get the model, up and running. So if that's what you're after, feel free to skip ahead to the relevant part of the video. But first, I did just want to briefly go over aspect-based sentiment analysis, what it is, why it's useful, and how InstructABSA comes into play. So we're all familiar with customer reviews for products. We see these all over the internet. You can see some on your screen right now. And they frequently have star ratings attached. Now, general sentiment analysis, which you've probably heard of, would look at some text, do its calculations, and figure, okay, this piece of text seems like it's generally positive or generally negative. And while that might be useful for some things, it's not so useful for customer reviews because, as we said, reviews usually have star ratings attached. And the star rating essentially tells us already what the overall sentiment is. If it's 4 or 5 stars, you can guess that the overall sentiment is going to be positive. If it's 1 or 2 stars, you can guess that the sentiment's probably going to be negative. So what is a business owner, what are they supposed to do if they want to get more detailed analysis on their product or service? What if they want to know why people are giving positive or negative reviews? That's where aspect-based sentiment analysis comes in, because with this type of analysis, as its name suggests, you can dig into a review on a more granular level, extract both the sentiment as well as the specific aspect that is driving the sentiment. So it won't just tell you this review seems positive. It will tell you these are the aspects that are driving that positive sentiment. And also, if there's negative sentiment in there, it will tell you what aspects of your product or service are driving that negative sentiment. So we can see on this Amazon page that Amazon has actually started doing this, I want to say in the past year or so. I'm not sure of the exact time frame, but they have extracted various aspects of the product and assigned a sentiment classification to each aspect. And that's what these little green check marks mean. If their model detected a trend of negative sentiment toward an aspect, it will get a little orange negative. There's none of that here with this product. Ones that don't have either a green check mark or a negative are considered neutral. And this is what InstructABSA allows you to do. So now I'm actually going to switch over to our Hugging Face space. This is a space I created that hosts a fine-tuned version of the InstructABSA model. You can enter in a sample review sentence. You can hit submit, so we'll do that now. And then it will return the extracted aspects as well as their associated sentiments like this. So you can see for this sample sentence, food was extracted with an associated positive sentiment. The service was also extracted, the other aspect, with a negative sentiment. And that matches the sample input sentence that we had here. So that's the idea. Now, obviously, this would be very inefficient to go through. Let's say you had thousands of reviews or tens of thousands of review sentences, and you wanted to run them through a model like this to try and figure out what aspects were good, positive, what aspects were negative. It's obviously inefficient to do them one sentence at a time like this. So that's where InstructABSA comes in. That's where now we're going to hop over to the code, into the Jupyter Notebook. We'll take a look at it, see how we can get it up and running, and use it to perform the analysis for our business. All right, so here we are on the InstructABSA GitHub repo page. Just wanted to briefly take a look at this, go over a few things just so everyone's on the same page. So the main place we're going to be taking a look at in this video is this joint task training and inference notebook. The joint task is the task where You give it a review or a review sentence, and it will take a look at that sentence, extract the aspects, whether that's food, whether that's the battery, whether that's the service, and then it assigns a sentiment to that aspect, saying it's good or positive, negative, neutral, based on the words around it. That's the joint task. There's also this ATE task, which just extracts the aspect. There's also an inference notebook. This is where you have your model. The default is just this InstructABSA model, not fine-tuned to your data. And then you can feed it a sample sentence, and it will spit out the results. It's got a few different tasks here you can see. Going back a couple pages, we've got the instructions.py, which is a bunch of sets of instructions based on the given task that you're trying to do. And it also has two sets for each task, BOS Instruct 1 and BOS Instruct 2. BOS stands for beginning of sentence instruction. That's what you feed to the model before you input your actual test that you want to translate, basically giving it a prompt saying, this is what I want you to do. The reason there's two is because it was trained on both the laptop and the restaurant data sets. There seems to be two standard data sets that they use for these types of tests, the laptop reviews and then the restaurant reviews. So there's different sets of instructions for each of those. Here's the data sets folder. This is where it's going to store the data sets for its tasks. Its tasks meaning InstructABSA's default tasks. But when you clone this repo to your computer, you can also store your own data sets in those folders just to make things a little easier so you don't have to modify too many file paths. So you scroll down, you can see, just give some more information. The big thing here is going to be this data set requirements. It shows you how the format that you're supposed to have your data in so that the model can be trained effectively. And there's a very specific format here as far as how you want it laid out. A little bit later, I'll actually show you a tool that I made to make this hopefully easier if you're going to be annotating your own data sets. Just some more information here. This InstructABSA 2 for the joint task is somewhat relevant, but I'll cover that when we go through the notebook, and then the rest, just more information if you want to run it from the CLI or something like that. All right, so here we are in the joint task training and inference notebook that I referenced just a minute ago. To get to this point, you would clone the repo, you would install the requirements.txt file, and then you would launch up Jupyter Notebook and get to this point. That's assuming you want to run it on your local PC and not in Colab, which is also an option. But I'll scroll down through this and just go over some of the things, because there are going to be some problems if you try and run the cells in the notebook as is. It's not completely updated. So I wanted to show you real quick the changes you have to make to get it to work. So just going to scroll down through this. Obviously, you'll change your root path, whatever you're working with. I've changed mine. Then we'll go down to this training section. You can change the experiment name to whatever you want. And the model checkpoint, you'll see I've updated to this Kevin Scaria model that is on Hugging Face. If you go back to the original notebook, you'll see here that it's set as the Allen AI TK model. That's the model that InstructABSA was actually trained on. But we want to fine-tune the InstructABSA model. Does that make sense? It was fine-tuned on Allen AI. We want to fine-tune it. So that's why we're updating the model checkpoint name. And then the next cell, these data sets, the default is going to just be the laptop, train, and test. You can update those to whatever you name your data sets. Probably best to just store them in the same folder so you don't have to change too much about the path. And then when we try to run this cell as is, let's say we update our data sets, we have them to the path that we want, and then we try to run this data set, run this cell, you'll see we get an error here. It says the dataset loader has no attribute create data in joint task format. And this is where the notebook is a little bit out of date, the default one. You have to actually change this joint task in all its places. You'll see dot joint, dot joint. You have to actually change that from joint or joint task to ASPE. So I'm going to do that real quick just to show you in real time how you do it. Instead of joint task, you'll highlight it here, and then it's going to be ASPE. That's assuming we're still doing the joint task, the aspect, sentiment, polarity, and polarity extraction, where we want both the aspect and the sentiment. You'll change it in all the different spots here. Just like that. Now, the other thing here you'll see in this comment, it says, set the beginning of a sentence instruction 1 for laptop and BOS instruct 2 for restaurant. So I've already changed it to BOS 2 because my data set is a restaurant data set, but you can change that to whatever is appropriate for you. And also, like it says, you can modify the instructions.py file to include if you have I don't know, let's say you have a trucking business and you want to evaluate reviews for your trucking business. You could set up some sample instructions there to get a little bit better accuracy. So once we make those changes and then we go and run this set, it runs fine and it'll move us to the next one. This cell is all the training arguments for the model when you go through your training. Hang on, model checkpoint is not defined. Why are we getting that? Did we run this? We did not run this. That is why. So now we're not getting an error, but it's loading. So we'll move on to this next one. This is the actual train function. And this is also where it's going to be a little bit out of date because I've already tried to run this cell. And as it goes through the training process and you only have a train and a test set, if you only have those two sets, you'll actually get this error from the trainer function. It's going to require an evaluation data set, as you can see here. And this is pretty frustrating because a lot of times you'll get a decent ways into training, which can take quite a long time. I forget how long this took. It took quite a while, even though my sample sets are usually really small in this case. They're only like 20 samples long. And still, it took quite a while to get to this point because I'm running on a CPU only to get this error and tell me that I need the evaluation data set. But anyway, to avoid that error, what you want to do is split up your data set into not just a train and a test set, but a train, a validation, and a test set, which is pretty easy to do if you're comfortable with the train test split function. But just for ease of everyone's use, so you don't have to go and manually modify this, what I actually did is I forked this repository and I made these changes in the notebook. So if you want to do the joint task, all you have to do is simply clone that repository and this notebook will be updated with all these changes automatically. So you don't have to worry about getting everything perfectly right. It has a section for splitting your data into train, validation, and test. And likewise, down here for this inference section, we run into some of the same problems. You'll see it's still a joint test down here. So if you wanted to actually, evaluate your model, see how it did on the train set, test it against maybe the baseline InstructABSA, you would have to modify these cells as well. All that's been done. So that all you need to do is make sure you have the right instructions file, and then obviously customize it with your own data sets and your own experiment name and file path. So I'm going to take a quick look at that. We'll switch right over. I'll show you that real quick, and then we'll look at that data annotation tool and wrap up. All right, so here we are in the updated notebook. in the new repository, and I'll leave a link to this repository in the video description. This is the forked repository that I made so I can make some changes to the notebook, make it a little bit easier so everyone doesn't have to change everything manually. If you scroll down, you can see I've added some comments here to where you can enter your own details. There's the file path, your experiment name. You can see the model checkpoint has already been updated, so you don't have to change that. You can change your data set path, and then the joint task has all been changed to ASPE. You'll still need to update the beginning of sentence instruction depending on what you need to do, but that's just automatically set at 2 for restaurant. We've got the training arguments, and then here's the big thing. It's creating this validation set. Obviously, it lets you know it's going to get an error if you don't create one. And then it's got the code to actually create one. So we'll use the train test split function to split the tokenized data set, the test set, into 2. And you can do whatever size you want. We're just splitting it evenly into 2, half and half, as you can see there. And then in the next part, because it's split now, this ID tokenized data set was split into 2, a train and test set. We're just creating a test set with one half and a validation set with the other half. And when you print this out, I haven't run this cell or anything, but when you print this out, you'll actually see how it's now divided into 3 separate parts. You got the train, you got the validation, and you got the test. And then I have tested this. When you run the code, you will no longer encounter an error when you run this train function. So that'll solve that problem. It still will take a while, probably, depending on what you're running it on, but you will no longer get the error and you'll be able to fine tune your model. And then going down below, the inference has all been updated as well. So all you need to do is update your data set as above, change the instructions if you need to, and run it. And you'll be able to get the accurate output and compare your model versus a baseline, compare different versions of your model, and so on. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to do was show you the data annotation tool. This is a tool that you can use to annotate your reviews in the format that InstructABSA needs to perform the fine-tuning on them. Obviously, to do that by hand for potentially hundreds of thousands of reviews would be extremely time-consuming. So it'd be nice to have a tool to make it a little bit quicker, even though there's still not a great way to do it super quickly. So it's just a little bit of manual labor, but a tool like this definitely speeds it up. So I'll show you the tool here. This is just the code in PyCharm. I will upload this to the GitHub repo so you have access to it, but I wanted to quickly go over what's going on here. So this first part here, this is essentially taking your CSV file where you have all of your reviews, just paste it into a column. I'll show you. Here we go. All these reviews, each one is just in the A column, its own separate row. This is its own review. This is its own review. There's a duplicate. That's what it looks like. This is your data frame, not your data frame. This is your CSV file right here. Obviously, mine's on my desktop. You can have yours wherever. This is going to point to just your CSV file with your reviews. And what you do by running this block of code is it's going to create a new data frame and a new CSV file, breaking each of those reviews into individual sentences using these for loops. It'll take each review. So it'll take this review, for instance, which has 4 sentences, and it will break up each sentence so that instead there's 4 separate rows, each with 1 sentence apiece. That's what this block of code does. And you can see I've commented it here. You only need to do this one time, and then you can comment this block of code out. You won't need to run it again unless you're doing it with a new set of reviews. But that's what this first section does. And then when you actually run the code, here's what the app looks like. So I've got my tool here. You can see this sentence here, I loved the food so much, corresponds with the very first sentence of the very first review. That we're at the very top of the CSV file. I love the food here so much, but I have to say the service was lacking, blah, blah, blah. So it basically just breaks it all down into sentences. And then what you can do from here is for each sentence, you highlight any aspects that are in the sentence. In this case, food is an aspect, and then you assign the sentiment to it. So you highlight it with your cursor, and then you click positive, and you'll see we get the dictionary format down here with term, polarity as the keys, and then the specific aspect and the sentiment as the values. And once you have that value loaded in there, you'll hit next. And it's going to take you to the next sentence. You can see, but I have to say the service was lacking and the food ordering process wasn't my favorite. You can see that sentence now is loaded up in our annotation tool. And you just do it again. We've got an aspect service with negative sentiment, food, ordering process, probably more accurate. We'll say ordering process is an aspect they didn't like. That was negative as well. We'll hit next. Takes you to the next sentence. And you just keep doing this for every sentence of every review. So, like I said, it's not going to be blazing fast. It's still a little bit of a manual process, but it's a lot faster than literally typing that every single time. It'll save you a ton of time on that front. If there's no aspects in a particular sentiment, you can just hit next, and it'll basically just leave that row blank. That's fine too. But yeah, you just keep doing this. We can say wings, they're just okay. So you would hit negative, hit next. And then here's a cool feature of this app. Let's say, we've got a pretty long CSV file with a lot of reviews. Let's say we've done it for a little while. We want to take a break. What you can do, if you just X out of the app, it will actually save your progress in whatever CSV file you have. So if we go down to the save function, saved it to annotated sentences.csv, and we have that loaded up over here, and we can see that the last sentence that we did, which was this garlic parm wings, that's the last one that has any aspect terms loaded after it. The rest are all just blank because we didn't reach those yet. And so what you'll want to do to start back up, since we've already done this step and converted our CSV file to this new data frame or CSV file of just sentences, we don't have to do that again. We can comment out this code. And down here, when it's asking us, what's the CSV file we want to use to load up, we'll actually use the one we just created. In our case, it's annotated sentences.csv. So we'll have to change that as well. There's probably an easier way to do this, but I just wrote this for myself and now I'm sharing it. So if you want to modify the code to make it a little bit more intuitive for yourself, feel free. But now when we start it back up, we're going to start where we were before. So if we go back to annotated sentences, after this garlic parm wings sentence where we assign the sentiment, the next was the wings were just okay. That's where we start. The wings were just okay. Neutral. Just okay. Blah, blah, blah. We keep going. We do this. We can save it again. It'll save our progress. If we come back here and run it, starts back up where we left off. So that's how you can more quickly go through and annotate the data for your InstructABSA model. And the last thing I wanted to go over was, in addition to the annotation tool, I also wrote up a couple of helper functions to clean up the annotated data set once you're all done with it, as well as split it up into train and test sets if you'd like to do that as well. So once you've gone through and annotated your entire data set, you're going to have a bunch of terms like this one where it's just a blank with no aspect taken out of it. So there's basically no data from it. This first function here, the remove blank terms, that's going to eliminate all of those rows and then save it into a new CSV file just to clean up the data a little bit so it's easier when you go in and make it into a data frame. Second one's pretty self-explanatory. It's just going to split the data into a train and test split. You can adjust these however you want to. It's 70/30 by default, and obviously you can change where you save the file. So I'll go ahead and upload all these files that we've discussed on the GitHub that I'll link in the description below. But this is basically the end of the quick tutorial of how to get InstructABSA up and running, at least for the joint test for the most part. Even if you're trying to do some of the other tasks, this will probably be helpful. I would think troubleshoot some of the stuff if you encounter any errors. These were the problems that I encountered when trying to set up InstructABSA for the first time, because there's not a ton of documentation on it. Things get out of date, and I just wanted to help out anyone else who might be trying to use this repo, because it is a very, very useful function, I think, and it can be used for a lot of good things. Create some really good business insights if you use it appropriately. So just wanted to help out anybody who was running into the same struggles that I was. By all means, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. One thing that I didn't cover in this video that I might cover in a future video is how to actually scrape reviews off of Yelp and Google and that sort of thing to get data for your data set. All this tutorial basically assumes you already have that data, but that can be a challenge as well to getting that. So perhaps in the future, I'll create a tutorial on how to do that. But this is pretty much it for InstructABSA. If I have any follow-up things that come up, I'll post another video. Like I said, if you have any questions, leave them below. I'll try to answer. But thanks for watching. You have a great rest of your day.